Awesome. Thank you, guys. For those of you guys that don't know me, my name is Gary Brecka. I'm a human biologist, a biohacker, and a researcher. As soon as I start to talk about what I used to do, for some reason people gravitate and get a lot more interested in my previous career than what I do now, so I'll just get that out of the way real quick. For 22 years, I was a mortality researcher for the insurance industry, which meant if we got 5 years of medical records on you and 5 years of demographic data, we could tell the insurance company how long you had to live to the month. And this is some of the most accurate research in the world because the database that insurance companies have, which is the largest population database in the world, has 360 million lives. Contains information that no other database on the planet has. No wellness franchise has this, no clinical study ever published in modern medicine has this, no physician's office has this, the National Library of Medicine, the National Institute of Health don't have this information. They have the day, the date, the time, the location, and the cause of death for every person that ever took out a life insurance policy that they paid a death claim on. And 360 million times they traced that information back to the specifics that occurred in their life that shortened their health span, that shortened their lifespan, and led to some of the most common ailments that most people in this room are suffering from right now. And I'm not talking about pathology and disease, I'm talking about things that we don't take for granted, things like clean, clear, waking energy, healthy cognitive function, a poor response to exercise, the depth of our delta wave of sleep, our water retention, our hormone balance, our waking energy. These things that we have accepted as society and humanity as a natural consequence of aging. By the end of my talk today, I'm going to talk about the value that we're going to bring to this room, but I believe that most of the people that are sitting in this room right now are walking around at about 55 or 60% of your true state of normal. And if the database that I had access to for 22 years could see the light of day, it would permanently change the face of humanity. Unfortunately, that database never will. You see, the insurance companies are the polar opposite of Google and Facebook. They collect voluminous amounts of information, but they don't share that information back with anyone. If they did, it would upend modern medicine and healthcare in a way that would be so profound that it would take our medical system back about 45 years. So during this time that I was a mortality researcher, which really sounds gruesome, it kind of is. But during this time that I was a mortality researcher, one of the major issues was that I was allowed to see your medical records, all of your demographic data. I was allowed to see your genetic data, but I was not allowed to have any contact with the patient or any contact with the treating physician. So even if I saw life-threatening drug interactions, I couldn't warn the patient. So does anyone know, just really quick, does anyone know what the third leading cause of death is in the United States? Put your hand there. Medical error. That's right. So the leading cause of death is cardiovascular disease, the second is cancer, but the third leading cause of death in this country is modern medicine. It's astounding when you think about that. If you want to look up the clinical study, it was done by Harvard in 2016. It was repeated by Johns Hopkins in April 2019, and that study got worse. So they published the Harvard study and retired the Johns Hopkins study. I mean, if you translated that to any other industry, it would be laughable, right? I mean, how many of you guys are in karate and martial arts? If you owned a karate studio, with you, the third leading cause of people getting their ass kicked. Probably would come to Mike Joe's, karate studio. We're the third leading cause of people getting their ass whipped on the playground. Bring your kids, right? If you sold security systems, you were the third leading cause of home invasion, how well do you think your business would be doing? But this is where we go for information on optimal health. So as this career transcended, I began to realize that I was brainwashed, that it wasn't just data, that there was human beings on the other side of these spreadsheets. And I remember a very specific case. There was a woman that I was doing a life expectancy review on. She lived in the Midwest. She was getting ready to go to her winter home in Miami. And she had a cardiologist in the Midwest, a cardiologist in Miami, and I saw that the cardiologist in Miami had written a contraindicated script. So I knew as soon as she left her home here, she was going to move. She was going to land in Miami. She was going to go to the pharmacy, pick up that script, and she was going to immediately have a thrombolytic event, a stroke, or an embolism. So I walked into my human resource director's office. I'll never forget this woman as long as I live. I only hate one person on this planet. And her name is Nancy Honeycutt. If you want to stalk her on Facebook, she's a witch. I'll give her phone number out at the end of this call, right? I know we're not supposed to do that. We're supposed to forgive and forget, but I have hated her from the day I started working there, and I hate her more today. Because I walked in her office and I said, Nancy, I'm calling this woman. This is the one. And I'll never forget, she said, Gary, if you call that woman, we will not only fire you, we will prosecute you. We'll put you in prison. We've done it before, and we'll do it again. So you need to go back to your desk, you need to get me my report, and stop coming into my office on your moral high horse. And so that day, I sat at my desk, and I wondered, how many more days, how many more months, how many more weeks, how many more hours, how many more freaking minutes am I going to sit here and predict how soon people are going to die when I have the knowledge to help people live longer, healthier, happier lives? And I turned in my resignation that day, and I went home and told my beautiful fiance that I quit my job and I wanted to start a wellness practice. And so my goal is to change the face of humanity by getting this information out. This information doesn't belong to me, it belongs to all of you. I'm also not stupid enough to think that I can do this on my own, but I am smart enough to know that I can build an army and do it with all of you. So, do you guys want to go on this journey with me? Woo! All right, I already like you guys. So, every time that I speak, I make a big, bold promise. Well, that was one of the life expectancy predictions that I did. Still, to this day, my fiance will tell you, every few weeks, I actually get confirmation of a life expectancy report, some of them that I did 23 years ago that are maturing within 3 months of our predicted date. Right, so we're going to talk about how does that happen, right? Because first we have to understand that all human beings leave this earth the same way. Everybody in this room will die of the same thing. It's called hypoxia, lack of oxygen to the brain. Only we tend to think of it as an event, a gunshot wound, a bus, a heart attack, stroke. But the truth is that everybody in here is on a hypoxic curve. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. I'm going to talk about how we straighten that out. Because we discovered two things in the mortality space. Number one, that the leading causes why health was deteriorating were things called modifiable risk factors. And if I was to sum up my entire career in a single sentence, in just one sentence, and I think this sentence will be the most impactful sentence you will ever hear for the balance of your lifetime in terms of how many more years you have left on this planet, how clean and clear and awake your cognitive function will be, the depth of your delta wave of sleep, your response to exercise, your timing, your hand-eye coordination, your strength, your amount of water retention, weight gain, your hormone balance, and whether or not your chronological age and your biological age keep up with each other. Do you want to know what that sentence is? I'm not going to tell you. You got to buy my ebook. No, just kidding. I don't even have an ebook, but it felt like a cool thing to say. So that sentence is this: the presence of oxygen is the absence of disease. The presence of oxygen is the absence of disease. And as simple as that sounds, we did not find a single disease etiological pathway, not one that did not have its roots in a lack of blood oxygen. So one of the things we're going to talk about today is how do we get more of it? How do we transport it more efficiently? How do we drive it into our tissues? And how do we take advantage of oxygen in our system so that we can push our performance through the roof? You're about to see, in the next 6 months, I'm going to release the first series of superhuman athletes that I've been working with for the last 18 months. Some of them very public, like Saquon Barkley, Stefan Diggs, and some of the UFC fighters, but other athletes that you don't know that are about to compete in the Olympic Games, and you're gonna see human records shattered by margins we never thought possible. Speed, strength, hand-eye coordination, timing, things that matter to the people in this room. So I'm gonna talk to you about what exactly that means. So we discovered that the presence of oxygen was the absence of disease. The second thing that we discovered was that the majority of pathology and disease as we know it today not only doesn't exist, but it is a symptom of a simple lack of raw material in the human body. How many of you either suffer from or know someone that suffers from hypothyroid, for example? Right? How about high blood pressure? You have it or know somebody who has high blood pressure, or depression, or anxiety, How about ADD, ADHD, OCD? Okay, we're gonna crush all of these today. Because the next time, because these conditions run in families, we call them genetic. I spoke to a room almost 3 times this size, full of physicians once, and I asked the entire room, I said, by show of hands, how many of you are treating patients for these conditions? Genetically inherited hypertension, genetically inherited hypothyroid, genetically inherited drug or alcohol addiction, hypercholesterolemia, hypertriglyceridemia. By the time I'd gotten through 4 or 5 of those, 100% of the hands in the room were up. And then I asked this question. If these are genetically inherited diseases, can any of you tell me what gene is being passed from generation to generation that's causing those conditions? Not one physician can tell you that. Do you know why? Because that gene doesn't exist. We've mapped the entire human genome. There is not one gene in the human body that we don't know, and yet no one can tell you what gene is being passed from generation to generation that is causing those conditions. And if that gene doesn't exist, that means that condition doesn't exist. So then what is it? What is it that's running in families that causes drug or alcohol addiction or hypothyroid or hypercholesterolemia or all of these other conditions like high blood pressure and what have you to transcend through generations? You do not inherit disease. What you inherit is an inability to refine a raw material. And that deficiency leads to that disease. And I'm going to tell you today how you can find it and how you can fix it. And so my big, bold promise to you today, I make this every time I take the stage, is that if you do what I ask you to do, we will add, on average, 7 years to the lifespan of everyone in this room. You guys want to go on that journey with me? Woo! I like the little woos. I get a woo over here and a woo over there. It's like, I like the woos. 7 years, and I know this because this is the research that I did for 22 years. Right? And we trace these back to these very specific conditions. So what happens is, first we have to understand in the human body, there's not a single compound known to mankind, not one, that enters the human body that is used in the format that we put it in. So what happens to every single compound, every nutrient, every mineral, every amino acid, every protein, carbohydrate, every element that enters the human body goes through a process of being refined. It's called methylation. If your body cannot make this conversion, you have a deficiency. And it leads to some of the most common conditions that we suffer from every day, that we accept as a consequence of aging. But if we learned how to go back into the human body and find out what that raw material was that was missing, and we just put it back, you would be shocked at how well this machine can perform. Because God put us here to thrive, not to be average. We're supposed to have it all. But we accept such an erosion of our baseline sense of normalcy. We supplement purely for the sake of supplementing. We take advice from all kinds of gurus and industry leaders about what we can do to improve our state of optimal health. And we forget to ask our own body what it needs to do its job. When you deplete certain raw materials in the human body, it leads to dysfunction. I'll give you a very simple one. We saw all the time, very commonly, we would see single nutrients depleted in somebody's blood work. Take vitamin D3, for example. That's the single most important compound in the human body. If you're not getting enough sunlight, you need to be supplementing with this. And vitamin D3 is the only vitamin that a human being can make on our own. Not a single cell in your entire body lacks a receptor for that vitamin. So how important do you think vitamin D3 is to human function? So what happens is, as vitamin D3, as we age, and it gets lower and lower and lower and lower. Once it gets into the single digits for a long period of time, you eventually end up with rheumatoid arthritis-like symptoms. You don't have rheumatoid arthritis, but when you walk in to see your primary care doctor, you start explaining your symptoms, how your knees and your hips and your ankles hurt, and you're stiff and achy across the back of your shoulders, and it hurts now to make a fist. And about 25% of the treating physicians will say, you know what, you've got rheumatoid arthritis. No blood work, no sed rates, no counter check. You've got rheumatoid arthritis, and we're going to start you on corticosteroids. Right? Well, we knew in the insurance industry, because we chase death rates back to prescriptions, we knew that if you started corticosteroids, you had 6 years and 1 day until you were having a joint replacement. So now you had a clinical deficiency in a very simple compound in your body. You were missing vitamin D3, caused your joints to ache, and now you were diagnosed with a condition you didn't have, which led you to take a medication that you didn't need, which 6 years and 1 day later led you to have a joint replacement that wasn't required. As soon as you had that joint replacement, I would start to reduce what was called your ambulatory profile, how well you walk. Sitting, by the way, is the new smoking. Sedentary lifestyle is the leading cause of all-cause mortality right now. So now you start to reduce your motility, then I would bring in all the diseases that exacerbate with reduced motility. So you're missing vitamin D3, got diagnosed with a condition you didn't have, took a medication you didn't need, had a joint replacement that wasn't required, and now all forms of mortality are approximating, coming from your future closer to the present moment. And I could not only predict the onset of, but the severity of, and how quickly you would succumb to that disease. And I saw this happen over and over and over and over again. You see, we have lost faith in humanity and mankind and the ability of this to heal this, right? This is the most powerful thing that we have. In fact, how many have you heard of Dr. Bruce Lipton or Joe Dispenza? If you're familiar with those guys, we're doing a documentary series right now called The Frequency of Truth, which I'll talk about at the end of my talk today. And I'll tell you some powerful techniques where we can harness the power of this to heal this. And we'll do it right here while we're in this event today. So we realized that we were missing, these missing raw materials were leading to all kinds of conditions. And in the latter part of my career, we started actually doing gene testing. Because what runs in families is these deficiencies, these broken genes, which don't allow you to methylate to create this raw material in your body. And right now, if you knew exactly what your body could convert into the usable form and what it couldn't, and you just replaced that raw material, you would be shocked at how much your performance improved, how easy it would be to strip weight off your body, how fast your short-term recall would return, how quickly your sleep would deepen, how quickly your response to exercise would go through the roof. And those of you that compete or in the martial arts industry, you would see your hand-eye timing, speed, and coordination go through the roof, like they probably were 15 or 20 years prior. So, are you guys interested in figuring out what that is? I love talking to like health conscious groups. So, I was on this journey for 4.5 years, and I met a very special patient of mine named Grant Cardone. Do you guys know Grant? Yeah, love him or hate him. I know half the people I meet are like, I can't stand that guy, and half of them are like, he's amazing. So I was, my fiance and I had our wellness practice, and we touched the life of a good friend of his, and then he was making a major investment in Grant's fund, and he said, Grant, before I put this money in, I want you to do this test by this human biologist in Naples, Florida, and I want you to do this blood test, and I want you to do this gene test where they swab your cheek, and he's going to figure out what's wrong with you. And Grant's like, there's nothing wrong with me. And he's like, well, if you want the money, you got to do the test. So he did the test. And at the time, I wasn't super familiar with who Grant was, but I was in my office, and he called the office, and I answered the phone. He's like, hey, Gary, this is Grant Cardone. I said, hey, Mr. Cardone. And he said, look, man, I don't even know who you are. I don't know what you do. But before you start, I should just tell you, I got doctors hanging on trees and I got personal trainers coming out of my ass. Exact words. I don't like to cuss from the stage. And he said, I got personal trainers coming out of my ass. He said, I got 8 minutes, man. Why don't you just give me your spiel? And I was like, okay, well, aren't you rude? I didn't actually say that, but that is exactly what I was thinking. I'm like, you're a rude little thing, aren't you? And so I said, well, why don't we start by you telling me how you feel? He goes, I feel great. I'm running around the world. I'm building my empire. I feel great. And I said, well, do you mind if I tell you what I see in this test? And he said, no, go ahead. I said, well, Grant, I see a man that goes to bed exhausted, but his mind keeps him up until the wee hours of the morning, so that by the time you wake up in the morning, you're more exhausted than when you went to bed. I can see that you wake up sore and achy in the morning like you had a hard workout the night before when you haven't. And I bet it really bothers you that the soles of your feet and your ankles are sore when you get out of bed to walk to the bathroom and take your first piss in the morning. And he started to get quiet. And then I said, look, man, I don't know anything about your love life, but libido left the building about 9 months ago. That really got under his skin. And he got more quiet. I said, libido left the building about 9 months ago, and if I was to guess, the thing that bothers you most is brain fog. And he goes, what the hell do you mean, dementia? And I said, no, brain fog. You get a great idea in the bedroom. By the time you walk to the kitchen, you wonder what the heck you're doing in the kitchen. And then he got mad. And he said, who told you to say that? Did Elena tell you to say that? Did Jared tell you to say that? Who gave you that information? I said, no, nobody gave me that information. I'm looking at your gene test right here. And he goes, you can really tell all of that from that test? I said, I sure can. He goes, can you fix it? And I said, yeah. He goes, how long will it take? I said, a couple of weeks. He goes, okay, I'll do whatever you say, lotions, potions, creams, jellies, or injections. I rehearsed that because that's exactly what he said. Lotions, potions, creams, jellies, or injections. Like, we only have 2 of those, by the way. We don't have any lotions or any potions. I don't even think we have a cream, do we? But, or a jelly. Yeah, I didn't have half the stuff, he said. And he said, here's my credit card, man, just ship to my house. And he hung up the phone. And about 3.5 weeks went by, and then I started to realize who Grant Cardone was, and then I got another phone call back, and he calls the office. And so now I'm like super nervous, and I go back to my desk, and I don't know why I did this, but like it was a phone call, but I start neatening up my desk. And I think I like sat down and stood up and sat down and stood up like 3 times, and I go, what the hell am I doing? It's a phone call. So I went, boop, and I said, hello, and he said, hey, Gary, this is Grant Cardone. I said, hey, Mr. Cardone. He goes, what the hell do you have me on? And I was like, oh, God, it's over. Shut it down, shut the lights off, fire the staff. We're going to sell flowers or something. I never wanted to be in the wellness space anyway. And he goes, man, I feel great. He goes, I'm chasing Elena around like a high schooler. He goes, I got the energy of 10 men. The brain fog you talked about is gone. I don't have an ache or a pain in my body. And he said, Gary, I haven't slept in 10 years. I sleep 6 nights a week now over 7 hours. Not a single pharmaceutical. Just the compounds that were missing in Grant Cardone's body. 4 years of treating Grant now. 2.5 years after that, he bought our wellness franchise and now has injected enough funds for us to spread 1,000 of these franchises around America. So soon there'll be 20 of these in every state. So thank you. Because the mission really is to change the face of humanity by getting this information out here. So let me tell you what's in one of these tests. And you don't have to do this test through us. You can do it through us. There's plenty of companies that do them. But if you do any one thing for yourself today while you're here or over the next week, you need to find out what is going on with these 5 specific genes in your body. You see, if you pulled your entire genetic code, you would get so much unactionable noise. You got olive skin, you've got brown hair or green eyes or detached earlobes. That information is useless for treating you. But these 5 genes are the 5 genes in your body that are responsible for converting nearly every raw material that enters your body into the usable form. Not one of you right here today statistically has all 5 of those working. So once you know which one is broken, you know exactly what to supplement with. Because when I go to most people's supplement cabinets, I see all kinds of nonsense. St. John's wort and saw palmetto and CoQ10 and turmeric and all kinds of stuff. And when you start asking people, why are you taking that? Well, my friend takes it, and my neighbor told me to take that, and my spouse took that, and my uncle cured his heart disease with this one. You have to ask your body. We have to ask our biome what is missing and what do we need. So that gene down there, that first one, first of all 5 of those colored rectangles, they should all be green. When they're red, it means that both parents gave you the gene mutation. It doesn't work at all. So you can see that Grant had 3 of those 5 genes completely broken. So once we fixed that, once we supplemented for that deficiency, that's when his portfolio went from $720 million to $6 billion over the same 4-year period. Right? If you look at him, he doesn't look, act, or perform like a 64-year-old man. If you saw the Dana White podcast or the Kendall Jenner podcast, you'd know that these people were plagued by things like anxiety and depression, and they sought medical attention and chemicals and synthetics and pharmaceuticals to try to treat conditions that were just simple missing raw materials in their body. So if you have that gene mutation, which 44% of the people in this room have that gene mutation, I won't tell you what the nickname is for the MTHFR gene. You can probably figure that out on your own. It's the motherfucker gene. So I happen to be one, so I can say that. 44% of you are motherfuckers too, just so you know. So if you have that gene mutation, this is a simple inability to convert folic acid into the usable form called methylfolate. How many of you have heard of folic acid? Okay, how many of you know that folic acid is an entirely man-made chemical? We make folic acid in a laboratory. You can't find folic acid anywhere on the surface of the earth. It doesn't occur anywhere naturally in nature. It's made by a chemical company called Monsanto. So now, in 1993, the U.S. federal government signed a deal with them and said, well, you know what we're going to do? We're going to take folic acid and we're going to spray our entire grain supply with it. We're going to spray all white flour, all white rice, all white bread, all white pasta, and every grain made in America. We're going to spray it with the chemical folic acid. And that's what we call fortified or enriched. We don't use the term sprayed with folic acid. We use the term fortified or enriched because fortified or enriched sounds a lot better. Well, 44% of the population cannot process that nutrient, right? And so what happens when you put high doses of folic acid from normal foods or from supplementation into a body that cannot process it? The first thing that happens is it gets agitated and they go nuts. So it spikes the activity in the brain. The brain starts to create thought at a rate that is faster than it can dismantle thought. We call this attention deficit disorder. Right? How many of you either have or know someone who has ADHD? Okay, the true people that have ADHD are not even paying attention. So you guys, they're on their phones, so they didn't hear what they just popped up and they were like, what? So what do you say? ADHD, and they're asking the person next to them. That's how I know you have ADHD. So attention deficit disorder is not an attention deficit at all. It's an attention overload disorder, right? People that have ADD or ADHD do not lack the ability to pay attention. They lack the ability to pay attention to so many things. We have to remember that the human brain doesn't just create thought, it also dismantles thought. It is just as important for you to be able to create a thought as it is for you to be able to dismantle thought. This is why you're not always in the same mood, right? So what happens when we create thought at a faster rate than we dismantle it? The brain gets crowded. And we call this attention deficit disorder. Modern medicine says, well, because the mind is racing, let's put an amphetamine into the body to race the central nervous system to match the pace of the mind. That is a horrible solution. When you could put simple amino acids, L-methionine, methylated folate, into the human body and give the brain the raw material it needs to just degrade thought, and mood returns to normal. People that have that MTHFR gene mutation have a very, very high incidence of anxiety. Again, how many of you either suffer from or know someone who suffers from anxiety? Yes, almost half the room. 44% of Americans, by the way, have either been on or are currently on an antidepressant. That's mind-numbing, right? So we can dispel the myths about anxiety and depression right here too, because anxiety, if you ask someone that suffers from anxiety these 3 questions, write them down if you know someone who's suffering from them. Ask them these 3 questions, I will prove to you that it is coming from a deficiency in their body and not from a cluster of symptoms outside of their body. The first question is, have you had it on and on throughout your entire lifetime? They will say yes. The second thing you ask them is, can you point to the specific trigger that causes it? And they'll tell you, no, sometimes I can just wake up in the morning overwhelmed with anxiety. I can be driving home from work on an otherwise innocuous day and I can just be overwhelmed by anxiety. And the third question is, if you've tried anti-anxiety medications, did they work? And they'll tell you, no, they made me feel like a zombie. This is how you know that it's coming from your physiology and not coming from a cluster of symptoms. You see, as soon as we understand that the brain does not know the difference between perception and reality, right? We'd love to think that our brains are really sophisticated. It's not. It's like the brain's nasty. The brain's like the little Kim Jong-un of dictators. Just sits up there in your head and takes everything for itself. If the brain wants calcium, it'll leach it from the bone. If it wants amino acids, it'll strip it from lean muscle tissue. Brain's like the honey badger, doesn't give a shit, right? So, I knew you'd like that one. If we just did a little experiment, I mean, if tonight, for example, you drove home, not most of you, because you're like combat warriors, but if most of us, if we drove home tonight and we got out of our car and somebody was standing in front of us with a knife, we'd have an instant fight or flight response, right? Pupils would dilate, extremities would flood with blood, heart rate would increase. So you would have a natural response to this threat. But you could also be sleeping on the 5th floor of this hotel tonight and start thinking about getting eaten by a shark. The chances of a shark making it this far inland, right? And taking the elevator up, right? And making it into your room and biting you in that bed are 0, but you can have the exact same response. So once we understand that, we don't need the presence of a fear to experience fear. We don't need to have the presence of a balcony that we're looking over in order to have the presence of anxiety. We don't need to be stepping onto a crowded elevator. This can be entirely manufactured in our body. Right? If we don't regulate something called homocysteine, then anxiety comes and goes seemingly with no trigger. The same thing is true with depression. I know that because 44% of this country has experienced depression, that people in this room have either suffered from or know someone who is suffering from depression. How many of you know someone right now? Oh, well, let's dig into that a little bit then. I didn't know we were going to, I go down a lot of rabbit holes, so I get excited. But how do we define depression in this country? We define depression as an inadequate supply of serotonin. So if you're low on serotonin, you're by definition depressed, right? But so you would think if the definition of depression is low serotonin, that the fix would be to raise serotonin. But that's not what we do. We take people that are depressed, that have low serotonin, and we put them on something called an SSRI, a serotonin reuptake inhibitor. We actually take what little serotonin they have and we ration it. So by definition, it never raises serotonin. So by definition, it never ends depression. And this is why I have patients come in to see me all the time. And I go, well, how long have you been on antidepressants? They go, 18 years. I go, well, when did you think it was going to kick in? Right? Because if we understand that serotonin is made in the gut, it's actually made by those next two genes. See those next two red genes right there, MTR, MTRR? If those genes are broken, you are very susceptible to depression and anxiety. Because if those genes are broken, you can't methylate something called homocysteine. This is very easy to fix. You can supplement for that deficiency, and you can turn the serotonin factory back on in the gut. 90% of the serotonin in our body is right here. If you don't have it here, you can't have it here. So depression rarely begins out here. Anxiety rarely begins out here. It usually begins right in here. We used to have a saying in the mortality space that the absence of dopamine was the presence of addiction. If I start to deplete the neurotransmitter dopamine from your body right now, it will drive addictive behavior. There are people with that gene mutation, AHCY, right up there on the top right-hand side, that have impaired dopamine methylation. We take simple amino acids that are in your bloodstream right now, and the body converts them into neurotransmitters. And these form the basis of all mood, all emotional states. They're just a collection of neurotransmitters bound to oxygen. That's what an emotion is, right? The difference between anger and passion is one neurotransmitter and the presence of oxygen. That's it. This is why, by the way, no human being has ever woken up laughing. You can't wake up laughing because you don't have the oxidative state to experience laughter. Can you wake up angry? You want to do an experiment tonight? Just pinch your spouse while they're asleep. Wait for them to get in a nice, comfy sleep and give them a good, deep fingernail to fingernail pinch. And I promise you, they will wake up angry. Well, why is that? Because anger is a readily accessible emotion, because anger doesn't require the presence of oxygen. It takes 0 oxygen to be angry. But if you want to experience passion, elation, joy, arousal, libido, any of the hell yeah, I won the lottery emotions, all of them as a part of their molecular structure require oxygen. As you deplete oxygen, you deplete emotional state. So if you have that gene mutation, you're not converting neurotransmitters. And this is what drives addictive behavior. If you've ever been an addict or known an addict, you know that addiction has a tendency to shift. It never really goes away, right? Because we don't cure the dopamine deficiency. We can get somebody off of Suboxone or alcohol or nicotine. We can cure them of a sex addiction or a gambling addiction. But if we don't fix the dopamine deficiency, they will go back to that type of behavior. It may not be the same behavior, but it will be somewhere else. Why we are not talking about putting these raw materials back into the human body to solve these issues that humanity faces is beyond me. It's a part of my mission in life to say, if we just started gene testing people, because you do this test once in your lifetime, and you'll never, for the balance of your life, guess what you need to supplement with, you would see that the body starts to function properly because it starts to convert neurotransmitters and it starts to methylate inflammatory compounds. And some of these things that you're facing right now would become a permanent thing of your past. So the second big bold promise that I make every time I speak to prove this to you is that I say that I will take any ailment, any condition that you or a loved one suffers from, and right here from this stage in front of this audience, I will tell you exactly what raw material is missing from that body that is causing that condition. That is how exact the science of putting raw materials back into the human body is. So if you have a question about, and it can be anything from like, people ask me about cold plunges and all kinds of, yes, sir.
So my grandfather committed suicide, my father committed suicide. My whole Thank God with martial arts. That always inspired me. When I was in 6th grade, I was good at guidance counselor. Cried. Like, what's the matter? I was like, I don't know what's wrong. I was like, I feel fine. I sit down. And then as I got later in life to 40, the doctors started to say that's when, if you had bipolar in the family, history, it stays lower. It doesn't get jacked back up as fast. 2 years ago, I got on Wavering.
SSRI.
I was always egotistic. I was like, I gotta get motivated. I can control this. My mind is everything. It helped me, but then it tapered off.
Right.
And I got really low. And then I changed my diet.
Side effect of Wellbutrin is suicide, by the way, the leading side effect.
So I'm
Go ahead.
never sad. Like, I'm not depressed. All my life, I've had an amazing wife, amazing family. But I get the lows, and I'm trying to crush that. How do I stop that? Would this be something that
So what you're experiencing is something called mood numbness, right? Where the peaks and the valleys of emotion disappear, right? Because remember what I said about emotions. An emotion or a mood or an emotional state is nothing more than a collection of neurotransmitters bound to oxygen. So if you're deficient in that neurotransmitter, you don't have the raw material to manufacture that mood. It's like going to a bakery chef and saying, hey, listen, you can bake whatever you want, you just can't use butter. Think about the number of recipes that would affect. So now I say you can manufacture whatever emotional state you want, you just can't use serotonin. Or you can only use a very little bit of serotonin. So now your body goes to manufacture that mood and it doesn't reach that emotional state. These people spend lifetimes in waking up in gratitude and journaling and self-help and motivational and seminars and going to the right books. And for some reason, they can only reach those states like a heart monitor and then they fall back down because your physiology will drag you back down into the state where it most comfortably exists. This is a methylation issue in the gut. I wouldn't be surprised if you're a night owl and wouldn't be surprised if you've also had some intermittent gut issues on and off throughout your lifetime that you might have thought were a food allergy, right? Because food sensitivity, which is what we blame for having gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, irritability, and cramping, is usually not a food sensitivity at all. In fact, the most important thing about whether or not you experience those symptoms is not what you eat, it is how the pace of the gut. Does anybody remember what Henry Ford was made famous for? It wasn't the automobile. He was made famous for the assembly line. So the assembly line was a glorified conveyor belt, right? And so you put a part on it at this end, and about every 6 feet, somebody stopped and they tinkered with that part, right? Until it got all the way to the end and it was fully assembled. The human intestinal tract is no different, right? You put contents on it at one end when it exits the stomach. These are very acidic contents. As it moves through the intestine, you get to very basic contents by the time you exit the rectum. So instead of people standing along a conveyor belt, this is bacteria graded by pH. So if I accelerate something from an acidic environment to a basic environment, function will pervert. Gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, irritability, cramping. And we try to correlate it to what we just ate. And it's difficult because a lot of times when I talk to people that say they have allergies, I go, okay, what are you allergic to? Well, I'm allergic to corn, wheat, soy, dairy, gluten, blueberries, bananas, and walnuts. I'm like, woo. Those are all 9 of the essential amino acids. You can't be allergic to those or else you'd be dead, right? So then I ask them the next question. If you're allergic to corn, can you ever eat corn and not have a reaction? Yeah, sometimes I eat corn and I don't have a reaction. Okay, then you're not allergic to corn. Allergies are not transient, they are consistent. You're not allergic to milk on Monday morning, unallergic Wednesday afternoon, and re-allergic on Friday. But if that gene mutation, COMT, is broken, then your gut does not move at the right pace because you lack the L-methionine that the gut needs to move contents along in the gut. I can't even tell you how many intestinal issues I've solved just by supplementing with basic nutrients and raw materials. So you restore the motility of the gut, and then all of a sudden, all these seemingly allergies just disappear. So what you experienced was mood numbness from impaired gut methylation. Yes, sir? So type 2 diabetes, adult onset diabetes. So this usually begins with insulin resistance, right? So this is where the pancreas, the beta cells, the islets in the pancreas are steadily beginning to produce less and less and less effective insulin. I mean, insulin resistance, I can't even tell you how many conditions that leads to. By the way, do you know that we are one of the few civilized nations in the world that continues to call Alzheimer's and dementia Alzheimer's and dementia? Does anybody know what it is? What is it? Type 3 diabetes. Google it. You'll see the Mayo Clinic, the Cleveland Clinic, Keller University, Berkeley, National Library of Medicine, National Institute of Health. We have known that insulin resistance in the brain, which is called type 3 diabetes, is the leading cause of Alzheimer's. And then we developed this lie, this myth around Alzheimer's that people were losing their memory. That is not true. People are losing access to their memory. And access can be restored. So type 2 diabetes, if you look up, I want you to look up COMT, catechol-O-methyltransferase, and diabetes. You will be astounded how highly linked that genetic mutation is to diabetes, because insulin also requires raw materials for the cell to accept it. The primary role of insulin, by the way, is not to lower blood sugar. The primary role of insulin is to block any other form of energy use in the body. This is why people that eat the most sugar have the highest body fat. Right? Because insulin doesn't lower blood sugar by bringing sugar down. Insulin lowers blood sugar by blocking the body's ability to use any other fuel source. So if insulin is high, you cannot burn fat. If you saw that podcast with Dana White that got over 1 billion views, when I first met Dana White, he had a life-threatening level of triglyceride in his blood. His blood fat was so high that his blood was solid at room temperature because his insulin was so high. So imagine the conversation that I had to have with him to say, listen, you are at a very high risk, very eminent risk of stroke or thrombolytic event or heart attack. I actually want you to stop exercising, the first time I've ever told that to a patient. But you're at a high risk because your blood fat is so high, I'm gonna put you on a nearly all-fat diet. That really freaked him out. I put him on a prescription ketogenic diet. His triglycerides fell by 100 points a week for 8 straight weeks. So type 2 diabetes is heavily linked to methylation. Yes, sir?
I've had gout for like 28 years.
Yep, so gout is another, your triglycerides were 800. That's high. That's very high. They should be below 150. Right, so this is the same thing. So I would bet my entire career that you also have insulin resistance, what's called hyperinsulinemia. You do? Oh, you have diabetes. Okay, so there you go. So, so this is how that cascade works. Insulin rises because you can't metabolize insulin because catechol-O-methyltransferase is not sending these islets and beta cells the right material it needs to make insulin. And so we put you on an insulin injection regimen where we actually take synthetic insulin from outside the body rather than giving the pancreas a break and letting it heal so that the beta cells and the islets can start to make insulin again on their own. By the fact that you still have a pancreas in your body, that organ is not dead. It is dormant. If it were dead, they'd have to take it out. You can't leave dead tissue in the body. So most of us that have conditions like type 2 diabetes or thyroid or other issues, we think that these are conditions for life. That's not true. If your pancreas was removed, you would need to be dependent on insulin. But the industry wants to get you dependent on insulin. Do you know that diabetes is a $110 billion annual industry? Big Pharma makes $110 billion a year on diabetes. How many of you think they want to shut that down? Right? Oh, one person does? Okay, well, I would take issue with that. They don't want to shut that down. In fact, if you asked me, if you said, Gary, nobody would say this. This is a hypothetical. But if you said, Gary, write me a diet that would guarantee I get diabetes, I would go right to the American Diabetic Association website, I would download their dietary guidelines, and I would send them to you. Check it out. I'm not making this up. If you go there, you'll see, you know what they recommend for a type 2 diabetic first thing in the morning for breakfast? Bowl of oatmeal, glass of orange juice with natural honey, crushed brown sugar. If you know anything about diet, how much fat, how much protein is in that? 0. That is all high glycemic carbohydrates. So if you follow that diet, what happens? Your blood sugar spikes. If your blood sugar spikes, what do you need? Insulin. It's an insulin dependency diet. It's perfect. Break into your house Friday night, come back Saturday morning, sell you a security system. It's a perfect unit, right? Yes, ma'am. Okay, so how do you treat it when you don't have the organ? So if you had a thyroidectomy and actually taken the thyroid out. So this is super important to replace the methylation cycle, because here's the interesting thing about the thyroid that nobody is gonna tell you. You may wanna write this down, especially if you know anyone that's suffering from thyroid. And this is sounding more like a medical lecture than anything, but I like this stuff. You guys okay to be on this? Okay, all right. Because my fiance tells me that all I do is eat people's face, and so I feel like I'm eating your faces a little bit. But the information is important. So the thyroid produces two hormones, right? It produces T4 and it produces T3. Only the little known fact, right, is that when T3 is low, we call this hypothyroid, right? But the little known fact is that the thyroid only produces 20% of the T3 in your blood. Yet 100% of the time we medicate the thyroid, usually for a crime it's not committing. So when T3 is low, right, the question is, where does the other 80% of that thyroid hormone come from? It is methylated by that gene right there, MTRR, outside of the thyroid. You convert thyroid hormone T4 into thyroid hormone T3. If you can't make this conversion, your T3 is low and you have hypothyroid. And there is nothing wrong with your thyroid. But yet we always medicate the thyroid. So if you don't have the gland, the best thing to do is to take an NDT, a natural dissected thyroid, right? Like a Nature-Throid or an Armor, so that we can regulate those, and then fix the methylation that converts the excess T4 into excess T3 so that you have the right balance. Or else you're in this chemical conundrum that looks like a heart monitor, right? And you want your thyroid levels to look like rolling hills. You don't want them to look like a heart monitor. If you don't fix that genetic deficiency, which is simple with SAMe and L-methionine, magnesium, zinc, and a specific complex of B vitamins, things that are already in your bloodstream right now, if you turn that conversion back on, it will be much easier to stabilize those levels in the bloodstream. Yes, sir? Very rarely. We've seen it less than 1% of the time. I mean, there is less than 1% chance that everyone in this room has all four of those boxes screened. That test is $599. You do it once in your lifetime. You'll never guess again what you need to supplement with to reach a state of optimal health. Yes, sir? Oh, what about seasonal allergies? So seasonal allergies is another thing. So this is a histamine response, right? So when we have histamine intolerance, so seasonal allergies is none other than some kind of allergen contacting the body, contact dermatitis, or you breathe this in, and your body has an over response to it, right? It creates too much of a histamine response. The level of histamine response is regulated by methylation, right? Histamines is a category. There's a whole subcategory of histamines, prostaglandin E2s, bradykinins, cytokines. You know, in COVID, when people actually passed away from COVID, they didn't die from the virus, they died from the immune system's reaction to the virus. When the immune system overreacts and it gets in too nasty of a fight, it produces too much histamine, too much inflammation, and that's what can shut down the lungs. On a smaller scale, this is what happens in our olfactory membranes and our pharynx and down the walls of our esophagus, right? It clogs our sinuses. But the histamine response is regulated by AHCY, right? The body needs raw materials to act properly. Right? It actually needs certain raw materials in order to properly mount a response. You see, the body does not have the luxury that we do, for example, right? If you are getting ready to, I don't know, bake a chocolate chip cookie, but you are missing brown sugar and chocolate chips, you would just wait, go out and get those ingredients, come back, and proceed. The human body doesn't have that luxury. When it encounters an allergen or a pathogen, it's going to create a response. It knows it's going to over-respond because it's deficient in the raw material that it needs to properly respond, but it still responds. This is the same issue that happens with mood. You deplete serotonin, you deplete dopamine, and now all of a sudden somebody has an aberrant reaction to a normal situation because they lack the raw material to act normally. I mean, and every single one of us, if we would just replace these raw materials, I mean, the state of optimization that is right around the corner for you is astounding. Right? I mean, these superhuman athletes that I'm talking about working with, I can't wait for you guys to see these folks hit the market. We basically we take this gene test, we supplement them for their deficiency, and then all we do is bring everything from Mother Nature that's good from the outside and we bring it in. Magnetism, oxygen, and light. And I would encourage you guys to do that too. Have you ever heard of a PEMF mat? Pulse electro, how many of you have those? Oh, dude, those are phenomenal. Beamer, Pure Wave. You know, we're putting these in every single one of our centers. This magnetism, oxygen, and light. And you don't have to come see us. There are lots of wellness clinics that have these. You can buy a lot of this stuff online. Because remember, we get three things from Mother Nature. We get magnetism from the earth, We get oxygen from the air, we get light from the sun. Think about the last time you had bare feet touching bare soil or dirt or grass or sand, right? We don't come in contact with the earth that much anymore. Have you ever heard of grounding or earthing? Have you guys heard of that? That is so good for you. Human beings build up a charge. We need to discharge, right? And so what the industry has done, what modern marketing has done, it developed all these ways to answer what Mother Nature does for you naturally, which is to allow you to discharge into the earth. So we build up a charge. When we build up a charge, we become acidic, right? How many of you think that you can get alkaline by drinking alkaline water? Good. That is a complete fallacy. That is just a modern marketing myth. You see, in molecular chemistry, something cannot maintain its properties and also donate them. If it donates them, it loses them. So if a cup of alkaline water made your blood less acidic, it would by nature become acidic because its properties left. Does that make sense? So now we're in a chemistry lecture. But so by touching the earth, but you can get one of those, a PMF mat, and you can lay on that every day, and in 12 minutes, you can alkalize all 32 trillion cells in your body. In 16 minutes, you can shift the pH of the blood 0.4 of a point. No disease state survives in an alkaline environment. Oxygen, one of the things, I ran into one of you guys this morning. I was breathing at the pool. Who was that? Was that you? Yeah. Yeah, so I get cold, I take ice baths, and since they don't have an ice bath here, it was like 41 degrees out this morning, so I went and jumped in the pool, and then I sat out there at the pool by myself, and I just did breath work for 10 minutes. I will miss a flight not to miss doing breath work, right? I also have a system called Hypermax in my house where I just take an oxygen concentrator, fill up a bag full of 95% O2, I put a mask on, and I exercise for 10 minutes with that mask on. Repairs every endothelial cell in the human body. And then red light, this is going to be the rage in recovery and anti-aging. If you have access to a red light therapy bed or have a clinic in your area that you can go and subscribe and get into a red light therapy, especially those of you guys that are competing in martial arts and you're sparring and you're taking contusions or you're stretching your body or you're really pushing your body to the max, your performance is directly related to your recovery. Nothing will recover you faster than red light. 810 nanometers of light will actually go into your cell. It will kick out a gas called nitric oxide and force the cell to dock oxygen. By the way, if I took you back to high school biology for a second, how many of you heard of something called the mitochondria? Holy crap. Like only half of you had heard of Grant Cardone, but now everybody's heard of a mitochondria. So that's like a first. You guys are my people, like my science spirit animals. So what does the mitochondria do? The mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, right? Human beings are not powered by by the food that we eat. We're powered by only one source of energy. It's called ATP, right? So inside the mitochondria, there's a little motor, right? Spinning around. It's called the Krebs cycle. Every time this motor makes one revolution, it has two choices. It can either create 2 units of energy, or it can create 32 units of energy. Same revolution, one turn either creates 2 units of energy or 32 units of energy. It's like going to a car lot and there's a 100 horsepower car or a 1600 horsepower car. That's it. Right? So what is the difference between 16 times more energy or 16 times less energy? Does anyone know? Presence of oxygen. If oxygen enters that mitochondria, called aerobic respiration, it's 16 times more efficient. You can lay in a red light therapy bed and drive oxygen into all 32 trillion cells in your body in 10 minutes. That is the absence of disease and the presence of recovery. The superhuman athletes that we're working with, like some that I mentioned, like Saquon, for example, he's squatting 700 pounds. He may be, if he doesn't get injured, one of the greatest to ever play in the league. Uses magnetism, oxygen, and light every day to recover. We just took what Mother Nature gave us and brought it inside. Did you have another question? Yes, sir. What about sleep? So let's think about sleep. So at the top end of that sleep, remember I said that most people are not sleeping. Most people have 2 types of sleep patterns, right? They either lay down to go to bed tired, and the reason why they're not falling asleep is because their mind is keeping them awake. This is the gene mutation that Grant Cardone, the one that I just showed you. So if we can't quiet our mind, then when our environment quiets, our mind will wake up. And you'll just start thinking about the most innocuous nonsense, right? I mean, like I said, like, did I get everything on my grocery list? Did I return that email? Did my belt match my shoes today? Right? And this is not the kind of stuff that should keep you up at 2:30 in the morning, but it does because you can't quiet the mind. And so you end up being a night owl and you take a long time to go to sleep. And then when you finally do go to sleep, sometimes your mind wakes you up, right? Because it wakes you up with thoughts. This is a lack of something called L-methionine. This is what the brain uses to degrade thought at night and help you get into a deep sleep. When you take sleep medication, you have the opposite. Remember I said we'd love to think that our brain is sophisticated, but it's not? So little Kim Jong-un sitting up there, his primary job is to monitor blood oxygen. There is nothing your brain will not do to maintain adequate levels of blood oxygen. When you asphyxiate somebody, the reason why the brain instantly shuts you down is to preserve the amount of oxygen that is still left in the tissue to try to extend life. Right? So if you cut off blood supply and oxygen to the brain, it will instantly shut the body off. Right? It actually didn't run. You can hold your breath way longer than you can be choked, right? So the interesting thing is now the brain's watching blood oxygen. Now you go to sleep and your respiration rate starts to get really, really, really shallow. So now when your respiration rate gets shallow, what else starts to fall? The level of blood oxygen. If your body's not transporting oxygen well, the brain will wake you up. It will pulse cortisol, and you will look like a bouncing rubber ball going down a hallway. This is why people that are the most exhausted sleep the worst. You ever think about that? Like, I would think that somebody's the most exhausted would probably sleep really well. Probably the only thing they do well. No, they're tired because they don't have blood oxygen. They can't sleep because their oxygen level is too low. So then what they do, they go to their physician, they say, hey, doc, I can't sleep. Okay, well, here's some zolpidem nitrate, some diazepam, some Ambien, Lunesta. Do you know what those drugs do? They say mechanism of action unknown. Just read the label sometime. It says mechanism of action unknown. But the mechanism of action is it blinds the brain's view of blood oxygen. So now your brain can't save you. It can't wake you up. So you wake up the next day and you go, I hate taking Tylenol PM because it's still in my system the next morning. That's actually not true. That drug's been out of your system for 3 or 4 hours. You're feeling the effects of having suffocated for 6 hours. That's what you're feeling. You're feeling the effects of having suffocated because you've blindfolded the brain's capacity to save your life. You've avoided the cortisol pulse. You've gotten into a deep sleep and you suffocated for 6 hours. And people do this for years and then wonder why they're so brain foggy and their hormones are off and they're clinically exhausted. So if we understood the mechanism of sleep has a lot to do with our genes. If we could just quiet our mind, then we could stay in a deep sleep. So, yes. Yes, sir, right in the middle. So melatonin is part of the sleep-wake cycle, right? Melatonin is a hormone. It's naturally secreted by the brain. But the issue with melatonin is metabolized at 1 milligram per hour. So people think if I take a higher dose of melatonin, I'm going to go into a deeper sleep. That's not true. So if you lay down for 6 hours, but you've taken 10 milligrams of melatonin, you're going to have 4 more hours before that melatonin is metabolized out of the bloodstream. Melatonin is also useless without theanine and magnesium. If you don't have theanine and magnesium, melatonin is useless. That's why a lot of people don't respond to melatonin. So if you combine melatonin, magnesium, and theanine, you'll find that it has a much better effect. That's a metabolite. I'm actually a big fan of that. Yes, ma'am. After the booster shot, you're going to really take me down a rabbit hole now. I'm about to split the audience right in half on this one, dude. So I've already had my Instagram account deleted twice for this. So the boosters are, it's a tough subject. The definition, by the way, of a vaccine is something that prevents the infection and the spread. So let's just marinate on that for a second. That's the definition of a vaccine. When you put synthetic mRNA, messenger RNA, into the body attacks it, mounts an immune response, but it doesn't shut off the immune response because it can never get rid of a synthetic chemical, something that is synthetically messenger RNA. So this is why almost 30% of the patients we treat right now are vaccine injury patients. You see strange things like worm-sized clots, myocarditis. We had 11 professional soccer players retire this year because of myocarditis. Tell me the last time you heard of a 23-year-old professional athlete retiring for a heart condition. We had 11 in 12 months, 2 weeks after the second booster. So seizures are an issue with the brain's hemispheres communicating with one another. This generally occurs in something called the vestibular cortex. This is the whole genesis of the ketogenic diet, right? Because inflammation in that area of the brain slows the transmission speed. Remember that what happens on one side of our body is received on the opposite side of our brain. What happens on this side of my body is received on this side of my brain. So at some point when the signals reach the brain, they cross. If they arrive at different times, this is the definition of a seizure, right? We have stereoscopic vision, but if what I see out of both of my eyes is received in the hemisphere of my brain at different times, this will cause a short. And that's the simplest way that I can explain a seizure. So when these two hemispheres have the same information come in and they receive it at separate times, then you have the short. This is why the ketogenic diet works so well for seizures, because it's the lowest inflammatory diet. It's also very low in something called deuterium-depleted water. I want you to write that down. Deuterium-depleted water. This will blow your mind when you read about deuterium. It is the level of deuterium-depleted water in the brain that actually causes this hemispherical miscommunication. It's also highly related to those genes that I spoke about. If you Google methylation and seizures, you will be astounded at what you read. You'll think those articles were written for your son. Yes, ma'am. Spinal stenosis. Yeah. So spinal stenosis, like a lot of these issues with the spine, spinal stenosis is actually an issue with the bone. This is a bone growth issue. Eventually the spine starts to look like candle wax, right? And so on the outside of the bone, you have something called the periosteum. It's like a saran wrap that's actually covering the bone. So if you deteriorate this covering, then we say that the bone is deteriorating, but the bone's actually not deteriorating, the covering around the bone. And that bone is methylated from the same tissue that myelin is, and it is governed by methylation. If you Google methylation and spinal stenosis, you will see this, right? Because again, when we start to deplete raw materials in the human body, we can't cover our nerves, we can't produce neurotransmitters, we can't move contents through our gut. So a lot of these are much more simple fixes than we think. So was there any other questions? Yes, sir. Oh, chronic inflammation. So chronic inflammation is the root of all evil, right? And the challenge with inflammation is once a cell becomes inflamed, it's hard to help it, right? Because inflammation is a cell's way of telling the environment around it that it's hurt, right? It's just like when I twist this ankle, how does my body know how to heal that ligament and not heal this ligament? Because this one is inflamed. Right? And so when a cell is injured, it starts to send inflammatory signals into the bloodstream. But if this is an inflamed cell, and let's say it's inflamed because it's deficient in vitamin C, for example, and you bring vitamin C from the bloodstream right up to the wall of that cell, it will not let it in. It's like having a heart attack on the floor right there, but the paramedics being locked outside that door. They can't get through the cell wall to render assistance. So the thing that penetrates the cell wall is DNA, and DNA is governed by methylation. Remember, DNA has two roles in the human body. One is to create an exact copy of itself. The second, which is called replication, the second is called transcription, where it gives all of the instructions to the cell. It's like the CEO. It runs the entire show. It tells every system in the cell what to do. So when DNA is broken in one cell, it's broken in every cell in the body. So inflammation is usually found at the root of DNA methylation. You fix DNA methylation, which was what I'm encouraging you to do, then you will have this communication perfected and the replication perfected. Every day, 300 billion cells that are with you today will not be with you tomorrow. This means 84 days from today, you will be an entirely different human being. So if you fix this methylation process every day for the next 84 days, your DNA will improve its replication. This is why I tell people, I don't care what you're facing. 84 days from today, you can be a completely different person. And this is true with emotional states as well, yeah. Oh, I'm just trying to. The reason why you don't hear about this from doctors taking your blood, because he's had this done before, is because we can't build an industry on prevention, right? I mean, these are relatively simple fixes. Like I said, that test is $599. You do it once in your life, because when you go to your doctor, I promise you guys, yes, I'm here to sell you a genetic test, but I don't hide that. I think every person in this room, if you do one thing this weekend, you should find out what is missing in your body and fix it. You'll do that test once in your life, and I promise you, you will never guess for the rest of your life what to do. But why isn't your doctor doing this? Most physicians are not trained for this, right? I mean, most physicians don't understand that the human body is just a giant ball of frequency, right? I mean, cells communicate through frequency. How many of you guys believe in the universal law of attraction? Okay, good. I'm about to make the rest of you believe in it, because I'm a scientist. I didn't believe in it either. I went decades without believing that there was some kind of universal law out there that could attract things to my life or repel things from my life, until I was actually reading a physics journal one day. And yes, I read physics journals for sport. I was reading a physics journal one day, and I discovered a law in physics, and it's called constructive interference. It says if two frequencies of equal wavelength meet, the size of the frequency doubles. This means that you can get energy from conversation. You can get energy from what I'm telling you right now. How many of you are getting energy from what I'm telling you right now? Woo! All right, awesome. So, but you can also have energy taken away from you, right? Destructive interference says if they're opposite wavelengths, it will cancel out. There's actually an amazing study done, and I would encourage you to look up some of Joe Dispenza's work. This documentary that we're working on that will air next year will absolutely turn frequency medicine on its ear, because they discovered by taking human beings and putting them for a temporary period of time in something called a Faraday's cage, which is devoid of all frequency, they started measuring the frequency that was leaving our bodies, right? And they were able to isolate frequency with such accuracy that they could tell exactly what mood you were in. Not if you were upset, but if you were feeling despair or jealousy, or you were being resentful. If you were happy, calm, elated, joyful, or aroused, they could zero in on the specific emotion. The interesting thing about this clinical study was that they found the most powerful frequency to leave a human being's body. Does anybody want to guess what that is? It's not love, no. It's not fear. It's actually 4 times, the amplitude is 4 times more powerful than love. This is the most attractive frequency in the entire universe. It's the frequency of authenticity. They found that a person could only emanate the frequency of authenticity when their words were truthful and they believed what they were saying. That's why, have you ever heard that women are more intuitive? Okay, that's not true. Women are more sensitive to frequency, right? I'm not can't even tell you how many times my fiance has said, I don't like that one. Something's a little freaky. I'm like, how could he be? Look at his shoes. He drove a nice car. He's got a nice suit. Kind of jacked. I mean, how could he be such a bad guy? And she's like, I don't know. I can't put a finger on it. And I'm like, well, if you can't put a finger on it, then I'm going to do business with him. And then 6 months later, you're like pulling the knife out of your back. How many of you have had that happen? I just listened to her blindly now. Yeah, don't raise your hand. We're talking about you, babe. But this is because they're sensitive to frequency, because when someone is being inauthentic, they can sense that. That's why I say don't respect the people that take the stage today and tomorrow because of what they've achieved or how wealthy they are. Respect them for their authenticity. So they wouldn't be here if they weren't authentic. I lacked authenticity in my career for 22 years. All I wanted to do was be wealthy, but I was predicting how soon people were going to die, and I never achieved any measure of wealth. Then I left and started focusing on people's well-being, and now I'm wealthier than I ever thought I would imagine. And so this universal principle really does work. I don't know how we got down that rabbit hole. Whew, I feel like I banged a U-turn there for a second. I'll take 2 more questions, and I want to finish this up. Yes, ma'am. Does anything change after you have a pregnancy? Yes. By the way, that gene mutation is the leading cause of postpartum depression in pregnant females. Right? 44% of women have that gene mutation. What is the first thing that an OBGYN tells you to do when you're pregnant? Take what? Prenatals with what in it? Folic acid. Right? So they tell you to take a man-made chemical named folic acid because this will prevent a neural tube defect in your fetus, which it doesn't, but because folic acid doesn't prevent anything unless it's converted into methylfolate. right? So women follow that advice. They take 1,400% of the daily allowance of folic acid, and they develop postpartum depression. And then the pregnancy ends, and they stop taking the prenatal vitamin, and the symptoms go away. So they blame it on the pregnancy, not on the vitamin. So pregnancy can mess your methylation up, yes. And you need to fix that with the right supplementation. But yes, pregnancy is known to send methylation into a tailspin. And I'll take the last question because I'm at 0. And I apologize because I'm over. I don't want to make you guys go late, but I get excited. But yes, ma'am.
I've always had a healthy respect for staying away from modern medicine.
Yes.
Because I believe it killed my mother. And 6 weeks ago, I had a high blood pressure thing happening with myself.
So you had high blood pressure 6 weeks ago. Mm-hmm.
Right, yeah. And the first thing the doctor wanted to do was put me on lisinopril. And, I was a little freaked out. And I said, well, I'll do it for 30 days, and then I'm done.
Right.
Let's get this under control, figure it out, all that kind of stuff. Of course, 30 days is over, and she's like, no, I want you to go 3 more months. This is what they do. So anyway, I have a really amazing chiropractor who, he's also not in modern mainstream medicine, who is recommending like a red light sauna therapy
Excellent.
blanket.
Yeah. Red light is excellent for blood pressure.
And that's just what you had on the screen. So I'm just coming back to the law of attraction and the universe speaking to us. And
I'm speaking to you.
I had 2 people speaking to me about this in the last 30 days.
Yeah, it's amazing. Can I just touch on high blood pressure for 30 seconds real quick, and then I'll wrap it up. But most high blood pressure in this country, if you know somebody who suffers from high blood pressure, there's an 85% chance that they have a type of high blood pressure called idiopathic hypertension. The word idiopathic in medicine means unknown origin, means we have no freaking idea, right? Most people with high blood pressure have a normal EKG, a normal EEG. They have normal heart and lung sounds, normal dye contrast study, normal cardiac cath. They have nothing wrong with their heart. So why do they have high blood pressure? Because if you have that MTR gene mutation, you cannot lower an amino acid in your blood called homocysteine. Homocysteine is the most inflammatory compound in the human body. If you can't metabolize it, then it rises. And when homocysteine rises, when it's rolling by the inside of your arteries, it causes your arteries to clamp down. You have 63,000 miles of blood vessel in your body. What happens if I take a fixed system and make the pipes smaller? Pressure goes up. So now there's nothing wrong with your heart. You have an amino acid in the blood that's skyrocketed, that's causing your arteries to clamp down, driving pressure up, and now you're on beta blockers or calcium channel blockers or diuretics, trying to punish a perfectly functioning organ for a crime it's not committing because your body just can't methylate homocysteine. I put these people on something called trimethylglycine, TMG, an amino acid that helps the body metabolize homocysteine. As homocysteine falls, blood pressure returns to normal because there never was anything wrong with the heart. And I could go on and on and on and on about this, but I know I'm out of time. So guys, I really want to encourage you to either take that test down, 10X Health Test, or just click on that link, or you can come talk to us at the booth back here. I want everyone to leave here and know exactly what's missing in their body that's keeping you from a state of optimal health. But thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Mr.
Thank you.
Gary Brecka.